Well, I know there's a Pitt basketball game tonight, but the more I thought about it yesterday, the more I was sitting down, getting ready to record this Morning Pitt here today, I was like, you know what? I don't have anything to say about Pitt Georgia Tech, about this matchup. I mean, Pitt should win this game. I think, but I could have said that Pitt should have won a lot of games. There have been a lot of games over the past 2 months that Pitt should have won, and tonight certainly counts as one. And I would not be surprised in the least if they do come out and win this game and look good doing it. Well, no. I should say I wouldn't be surprised in the least if they fall behind by a dozen in the first half and end up winning this game, just like against Syracuse and Cal and all these other teams that they've sort of followed that same script. But the reality is that, like, this morning, so last Tuesday when they were getting ready for the Syracuse game, like, had a lot to say, had a lot of thoughts about it, things we wanted to do this or do that, but like, this game tonight, I don't have much in the way of a matchup breakdown. I don't want to say, completely given up or things like that. This team I still think has potential to play well, and I'll be curious to see if they do. I'll be curious to see who plays and how they play and what happens. I don't suspect that this team, the players and coaches are looking at it as well. We lost to Notre Dame. We're screwed. Season's over, even if a lot of fans are, understandably so. But I just don't have a lot to say about this game in advance. Now, tomorrow we'll have a full breakdown on the Morning Pit about what happens. We'll record that tonight after the game. But for now, I don't got a lot. So you know what? Let's talk a little football recruiting, because Pitt got a commitment over the weekend. They got a safety from Ohio, Isaac Patterson, to commit. So I thought, let's talk a little bit of football recruiting. Let's talk about 5 things that I'm thinking about right now, including the newest commitment, the official visits that are getting lined up. I think that was on my list. What was the other 5? No, maybe not. But there's a lot of recruiting topics and a lot of things that are interesting to discuss, I think, right now. And so let's talk a little football recruiting. Let's take your mind off hoops, at least for the morning, and then we'll dive back into hoops tonight during the game, and then, of course, tomorrow on the Morning Pit. But for today, this morning, a little football recruiting talk on the Morning Pit. YouTube.com/Panther-Lair.com. Yeah, it's Tuesday here on youtube.com/Panther-Lair.com. You know what we always ask you to do: like this video and subscribe to youtube.com/Panther-Lair.com. That way you don't miss any of our exclusive Pitt video content, whether it's these daily Morning Pitt videos, our weekly live show that we do every Wednesday night at 8:30 p.m. right here at youtube.com/Panther-Lair.com. Post-game shows, interviews, press conferences, all those things. We post videos right here at youtube.com/Panther-Lair.com, so you want to make sure that you don't miss any of it by tuning in. And the best way to make sure you don't miss any of it is subscribe. Hit that subscribe button right down there. It's in the little yellow .com. It's subscribe button. Click that thing and turn on your notifications. You won't miss anything we do. So like last week where we had to move the live show from Wednesday night to Thursday morning, or when we decided to do a live show after the Notre Dame game on Saturday, kind of threw that one together impromptu. Not necessarily at the last minute because I had time to go upstairs and get the bourbon in a shot glass. But when we throw something together like that and decide to do it sort of out of the blue, you can make sure you don't miss it if you're subscribed and you have notifications turned on. So do that, youtube.com/Panther-Lair.com. On the football side, Pitt got a commitment over the weekend. Isaac Patterson, or maybe it was on Friday, actually. Come to think of it, it was on Friday. Isaac Patterson, a safety from the Columbus area in Ohio, committed to Pitt. Mostly had MAC offers. He was a relatively recent offer from Pitt. I think he visited for one of the junior days in January, got his offer during that visit. And this is one of these ones, one of these kind of commitments that, and I think this has largely been the reaction of, you look at his offer sheet, you don't see, Clemson and Alabama and Ohio State on there, but it's a defensive back prospect. And I think that, particularly at safety, this staff has such a high rate of success and has had such a high rate of success at recruiting the safety position, of really having a keen eye and a strong sense of what they're looking for at that position, both in evaluation and in the ability, the ability to develop those players. That I think most people kind of give the staff the benefit of the doubt that, pretty sure they're going to find what they want and find what they need and get those guys to contribute. And so Isaac Patterson, you watch his film, he's all over the field. He's making plays, likes to play the safety. He plays safety in high school, which isn't always the case. Sometimes you see guys moving around to different positions, but he's making plays on the ball, getting interceptions and pass breakups. Certainly a good tackler, which is an important trait in any defensive player, but certainly in Pitt's defensive system, and looks like the kind of guy they like to recruit. It looks like the kind of piece that they like to add. So Pitt now has 2 commitments in the 2026 recruiting class, Isaac Patterson and then the quarterback Angelo Renda in Texas, who I think we talked about after he committed, sort of keeping an eye on that and seeing what his recruitment ends up looking like. But he seems like a pretty impressive playmaking quarterback. So 2 solid commitments to start off the class, 2 commitments to sort of remind you of a Pat Narduzzi Pitt recruiting class. Solid 3-star quarterback, getting an early commitment from a guy since you have an offensive coordinator for more than 1 year. And then, a solid defensive back, a solid safety prospect. It's the kind of thing it's the kind of start to the class that I think you would expect. I think you'd like to see those stars come in at some point, get the 4-star and the 5-star guys, the highly rated guys beating out the big-time offer sheets. I think more of that for Pitt at least. In most years is probably going to happen more in June when you get the official visits. You get guys on campus and impress them and sort of sell them on the program when they're actually here in person. But these early commitments, the guys you're going to get in January and February, are probably going to be more along these kind of lines. Maybe a little bit lightly recruited, not having the big time offer sheets, but obviously showing something that stands out to the Pitt coaches and impressing the Pitt coaches enough to take their commitments at this point. So 2 commitments so far in this 2026 recruiting class, with Isaac Patterson being the newest one. That was my, I've got this 5 thoughts on Pitt recruiting right now, because you got to have like a theme or a topic, right? That's what this, that's what these videos and articles and things have to be. 5 thoughts on this. Well, that was my first thought, is that Pitt got a commitment over the weekend. Or on Friday. The second thing, and I think this is probably a more interesting conversation, is I see a lot of reactions sometimes to recruiting news, and it's something along the lines of like, who cares? Half these guys will decommit or flip to another school, and the other half will transfer after 2 years. Well, it doesn't quite work out like that. You do lose some decommitments, and you do have some transfers. It's not half the class doing one and the other half doing the other, because then you'd have nobody left, right? But I understand the sentiment that it feels like player movement is happening more than it ever has before, and I don't think that's just perception. I think that's reality. There's a lot more player movement than there ever has been in the past in college football, and so it makes it a little bit harder to build connections to these players and be sort of intensely focused on them when you don't know who's going to even be, who's going to get to campus in the first place and how long they're actually going to be around once they get there. And then, of course, you throw in the other side of the transfer portal of not just players going out, but players coming in, and you sort of end up feeling like, well, my favorite team is only going to win or lose based on what they do in the portal anyway. The recruiting doesn't matter anymore. Well, we've talked about this before, and high school recruiting does still matter, even for the programs that are really high in transfers and really moving players that way. High school recruiting is still important. It's still a big piece of the puzzle when it comes to player acquisition and roster building. For Pitt, I was kind of adding up 1, 2, 3, 4, 5, 6, 7, 8, 9, 10. Just kind of back of the, not the legal pad, back of the game notes. These are the game notes from Pitt's game against Miami. On the back, I have written notes, because this is what you do with a big packet like this of game notes. I count just on the back of the sheet, 1, 2, 3, 4, 5, 6, 7, 8, 9, 10. I count at least 10 projected starters for Pitt in 2025 who came from high school recruiting. Guys like Ryan Baer, BJ Williams, Kenny Johnson, Francis Brew, Kyle Lewis, Rasheem Biles, Braylon Lovelace, Rashad Battle, Javon McIntyre, Cruz Brookins. I think these guys I would pencil them in as starters, and I think there's a possibility of more guys to join that group, but I think at least these 10 I would probably pencil in as being a starter in 2025. Now, that's less than half the team, right? Like, you have 22 starters between offense and defense. I'm talking about 10 guys. So you might say, yeah, big deal. Majority of your starters are going to come out of the transfer portal. True. But 10 is a not insignificant number. And I think if you expanded to the 2 deep, you'd probably find that you're at least at 50%, if not greater. And so what you ultimately see is a balance. And I think most people have kind of come to understand this, that you're going to have a balance on your roster, or something approaching a balance. Even if it's not 50-50, you're going to fill out a decent amount of your spots from the portal, and you're going to fill out a decent amount of your spots in the starters and the 2 deep from high school recruiting. And so even if it's not 50-50, you still are going to need to be able to recruit well and develop guys. You're going to need to be able to evaluate and develop those guys once they get to campus. Now, yes, a big part of your recruiting class is going to transfer. Like, that reality is it's inevitable. It's an inevitable reality, right? A reality and an inevitability. That you're going to lose guys to the transfer portal. And so you understand that. I don't think you make your plans in Sharpie quite as much as maybe you used to of, okay, we got these guys this year. So these guys are coming in 2014. Okay, in 2017, we're going to want to count on this guy and this guy and this guy from that 2014 class to be starters. You don't quite pencil, you don't Sharpie that in. You might pencil it in, but understand that those kind of plans can change. And some of the old ways of addressing needs and position counts and things like that are maybe a bit antiquated because of how the rosters turn over these days. But in the end of it, at the end of the day, you're still going to need to build a pretty significant part of your starting lineup and your two deep out of the high school recruiting. There was a time maybe 2 years ago where I felt like you're still going to build the vast majority of your starters in two deep out of high school recruiting, and then you top it off with transfer portal guys. It's shifted more and more as schools are, and Pitt in particular, as we're looking at them, are taking more and more transfers. And so, yeah, you look at Pitt in 2025, right? Starting quarterbacks to transfer, starting running backs to transfer, at least one starting receiver is a transfer, starting center is a transfer, probably at least one starting tackle will be a transfer, probably at least one starting guard will be a transfer, probably both starting defensive ends will be transfers, probably one starting defensive tackle will be a transfer, probably one starting cornerback will be a transfer, and probably your starting tight end, I would guess, will be a transfer, depending on what they do there. So, you're not just topping it off anymore with transfers. You're building a significant part of your starters in your two deep out of the portal, but not all of it. And so the high school recruiting does still matter. You do still need to evaluate well and develop well, particularly if you are a program like Pitt that is not going to have the deep pockets to go out and spend an NIL to bring in an entire two deep out of the transfer portal. There are schools that will be able to do that, and there are schools that will do that. The majority of schools will not. The majority of schools are in a similar position to Pitt, where you're going to try to fill in as many needs as you can from the portal, while understanding that you're still going to have a foundation built out of high school recruiting. And so all of this does matter. The guys they signed last year do matter. The guys they signed, look at the state of the linebackers right now. Linebacker is going to be that one position. We'll see what Jaden Bonsu from Ohio State, how he fits in potentially as an outside linebacker. But I think you could look at the linebacker position this season and basically have all high school guys filling out the two deep with Biles, Lovelace, and Kyle Lewis as the starters. And then behind them, really you could go Jeremiah Marceling, Cam Lindsey, and Davin Bruton, the three guys who came in last year. Now maybe Jaden Bonsu fits into that mix, or Nick Lappy, or whoever. It's unfortunate that Jordan Bass left, because he would certainly be in that mix. Maybe not as a starter, but he would be in a two deep role and play a lot. But effectively your entire two deep at linebacker is going to be built from high school recruiting. I would say at least half, if not the majority, of your cornerback two deep is going to be built out of high school recruiting. Your safeties are going to be built out of high school. Well, I guess they did bring in the transfer from UC, wherever it was. But you're still building a significant part of it out of the high school recruiting. So this stuff does matter. Before you just completely ignore it, getting Isaac Patterson to commit, getting Angelo Renda to commit, it matters. You know what I mean? It's going to matter, just like getting Francis Brew and Jasir Whittington and Sincere Edwards 2 years ago mattered. And I know Edwards has since transferred, but he played a lot last year. That was a recruited guy who was a recruited high school prospect who was a big part of the defensive personnel. So it does matter. You can't ignore it altogether. You can't just dismiss it out of hand, because you are going to build a significant chunk of your roster from there. When you look at this 2026 recruiting class, I tried to guesstimate on what I think the class size will be, but as they've changed the roster size limits and effectively done away with scholarship limits, and there's just roster size limits now, I think 105 is where it's going to settle. I don't expect Pitt to use 105 scholarship spots, but I think they'll use as many as they feel like they need to, which sort of renders the class limits moot. I mean, it used to be, how are you going to get under 25? How are you going to get under 25? Well, that doesn't matter anymore because you're not trying to get under 85 for the entire roster. It used to be you could only have 85 scholarship players, so you had to figure that out. Could you get more than 25? Could you sign more than 25? You can count these guys back. You remember you used to do that? The guys who enrolled early, you could count back because you could only give out 25 initial scholarships or something like that. Like, none of those things matter anymore. None of those numbers count. None of those numbers matter. The only number that matters is that total scholarship, that total roster size, which I think is 105. And again, I don't think Pitt's going to use 105 scholarships, nor should they. I think it just doesn't make sense. You should still keep probably at least 15, if not 20 walk-ons on the roster. You just don't need to have 100 guys on scholarship. There's no value in that. That said, I count about 18 scholarship seniors on this year's roster. It probably doesn't matter what that number is, but it does give you a general idea of what they'll be looking to replace, at least numbers-wise. But because there's no limits anymore, you might as well sign as many guys as you can get or as many guys as you want. And it's probably that second part, not as many guys as you can get, because you could always find someone to take a scholarship. There will always be players out there who want a scholarship. You could fill up your 105 pretty quickly, probably by the end of the week. You could. It wouldn't be hard. But it's as many guys as you want. If you want to get up to 90 guys, if you're looking at your recruiting class and you're like, wow, we've already got 25 guys committed and we know they're going to sign, but there's these 3 other guys we really like. Well, sign them. Like there's nothing holding you back from signing them because you're probably not going to get up against that 105 limit. And so there's not really how many guys do you think they'll sign this year? The coaches probably have a general idea of where they want to be, but they're really not limited by it. I mean, they're really not. They can go as far as they want to go. And so number of seniors going out, number of transfers going out, number of guys coming, it doesn't matter. As long as you're under that 105, and they're going to have, I think they'll always have plenty of wiggle room to stay under that number going forward. In terms of what I think they need in this recruiting class, I think because you're not limited in how many guys you can bring in, I think you should go heavy on offensive line all the time. And I'm not the first person to say this. I forget who has said it on the message boards. I think a few people have said it, that Pitt has under-recruited numbers-wise over the past few years. I don't think in general that's the case, but I think on the offensive line, it probably is, and I think they've tried to correct it. In the last few classes, the 2024 recruiting class, they signed 5 offensive linemen. This past year's recruiting class, the guys who are coming in as freshmen right now, they signed 4. So, I mean, that's 9 over the last 2 classes. And I think you go heavy again. I think you try and get 4 or 5 offensive linemen in this recruiting class as well. These guys that you recruit right now aren't going to necessarily replace the seniors on the current roster, but it is worth noting that in my projected 2 deep, I've got at least 7 seniors or juniors on the offensive line. 4 seniors and 3 juniors at least. And there might be other guys that creep up in there. So you're looking at a decent chunk of your offensive line 2 deep, either being seniors or, juniors who could decide to move on after the season. So you are going to need to replace them. That's why it's a good thing they recruited 5 signed off 5 offensive linemen in 2024. That's why it's a good thing they signed 4 last year. And I think you need to keep pumping those numbers. You're not going to get those 5-star come in ready to play offensive linemen out of high school. So you take big numbers and see who pans out. Find a lot of guys who fit your profile for potential, the guys that you think can work, and then see how many you can get. And, find out in 2 years how many of them can actually play. That's probably the best approach. I mean, offensive line recruiting is a crapshoot anyway to some extent. You don't know how guys' bodies are going to develop. You don't know how guys are going to develop and adapt to that position. You don't know who's going to stay healthy and all these things. So you might as well throw numbers at it. There's not much gain in signing 2 offensive linemen in a class. Even if you think those guys are surefire, guaranteed, awesome players, there's not much gained in it. I think in 2014 they signed Alex Buchser and Mike Grimm because those guys were dead to rights, absolute locks to be great in college. And Buchser ended up being pretty good. Grimm never played. It's even if you are absolutely convinced the guys are going to be great, you should still sign like 3 more. You might be like, these 2 guys, this is all we need because we know they are going to be starters by their sophomore year at the latest. Well, great. Go get 3 more to join them in the class. I also think they probably need to restock linebacker. I think we all love this linebacking core right now. We all think it's very, very good, and we're right about that. But Kyle Lewis, Rasheem Biles, and Braylon Lovelace are all junior-eligible players this year. Lewis is a redshirt junior, and Biles and Lovelace as true juniors. The clock is ticking on those guys. And so Pitt signed 3 guys this past year in Lindsey and Bruton and Marcelin, and that's great. In the 24 class, I should say. And then this year they signed 2 more linebackers, I think. You need more numbers. I think you need to bring in more guys. I knew, like I said, Jaden Bonsu came in from Ohio State, and I think he'll play outside linebacker, and he's got some eligibility remaining. But I think you need another big class of linebackers here. It's a tough position to recruit. It's a tough position to find, but I think the Pitt coaches have done a good job identifying the types of players they want for those spots. And so go get them and get a lot of them and start restocking that position group. I think linebacker might be a tougher spot for Pitt to recruit transfers than some of the other positions they've been able to bring guys in, whether it's corner or defensive line or whatever it may be. Because their linebackers are, I don't want to make too big a deal of, they have a unique type of linebacker. Because, everybody wants fast, athletic linebackers, right? Nobody's out there, they're like, well, we prefer the slow linebackers. We feel like that's what works best in our scheme. Nobody's saying that. But Pitt does, they have a certain type, right? And I don't know if they're always going to find that type available and ready to move in to an outside linebacker role. Even if it's a safety who projects really well, you've got to teach him and train him how to play linebacker, which sort of defeats the purpose of bringing in a transfer in the first place. You want a transfer who's going to be able to play. And if you have to convert a guy from safety to linebacker, that might be tough to get him available right away. So I think you need to recruit more there. You need to keep developing those guys, evaluating them well, which they have been, and then develop them into players to contribute in the next year or two. Because I think they're going to run into a spot where they're going to lose a bunch of these guys in a hurry. Particularly with Lewis, Biles, and Lovelace all, entering their junior eligible seasons. You're going to see these guys move on, I think, pretty quick if they build on the seasons they've already had. So that was 4 thoughts on recruiting. I didn't get to my other thought, which was WPIAL guys, but let's talk about the WPIAL on Thursday. All right, we'll talk about Pitt, Georgia Tech tomorrow. We'll get into some WPIAL football recruiting talk, or maybe we'll have a weekly recruiting episode of the Morning Pitt. We were going to have Transfer Tuesdays. Maybe we'll have WPIAL Wednesdays. No, because it's not all going to be about the WPIAL. But maybe next week we'll see. We'll figure it out, but we'll have plenty to talk about for sure. Listen, make sure you like this video and subscribe to youtube.com/Panther-Lair.com. It's it's the best place to get all of the Pitt video content. And then don't forget the website, Panther-Lair.com, Pittsburgh.rivals.com for all the Pitt sports coverage you can possibly handle. All right, enjoy the games tonight. Make sure you like and subscribe. Have a great Tuesday. Thanks for watching today, and we will catch up with you tomorrow for the Morning Pitt right here on youtube.com/Panther-Lair.com.